Krazy Fluid Art. Thank you so much for joining me on my next YouTube video of this beautiful cloud pour done on a cheeseboard. I can't wait to take you through this process. But before I do, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and the connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This land is theirs, was theirs, and always will be theirs. It is always my absolute privilege to create my art on the land that they once owned. So, let's get going! So, I am going to take you through the process of the creation of this beautiful board. I really wanted to do a cloud pour on a cheese board, and obviously I'm in Australia, so I have to tweak and make sure we're using Australian ingredients. And as you can see from this close-up, the clouds on this have just popped so amazing. It has come up so well, and I am looking forward to going through the Australian process of this with you all. All right, so here we have my board. It is a massive 60 centimeter round board with a handle on it, and I've already done all of the pre-preparation. I have put my tape down. I have wrapped it in Glad wrap. I do wish that I made it a wavy line. I think a wavy line would have suited this board better than a straight line, but it is what it is. I've taped my sides to the half so that the paint has somewhere to flow, and then the resin's got something to catch on when I resin later. And I have taped the back, and I've sealed it with the plastic so that the paint that runs over the side doesn't damage my board. I'm putting down my pillow, or like my base paint. I'm using blue because the colors I've chosen for this cloud pour are all blue, aside from the cloud, which is white. So for this, I have just deliberately chosen to go blue for the base. You want a base because you want something for the paint to flow over as you're pouring on. It could be white. I could have done white, but I had a lot of blue sitting around. So I thought, well, I may as well just get the blue out and use it. It will not deter from the end result. It actually might help the blues pop a little bit. So I'm just popping it around. I will put some around the sides as well. As you know, I tape half of my sides so that the paint flows over. It sits on half of the board, but I leave the bottom half free so that when I resin, the resin flows over and seals the paint and then flows over the last little bit of the board, so it's got something to hold on to. I used to find that when I let the paint flow right down the side, when I resin, the resin had nothing to catch on. So that on the bottom of the board, you'd have your board, a layer of paint and resin, but there was nothing underneath sealing that paint in. So that's why I decide to do half the board. Sometimes on a board, I'll actually tape the whole side so that I'm only painting on the top. It just depends on what I'm trying to achieve and what I'm trying to get with the design. So we're just making sure here everywhere has some of that pillow. Now, as you know, I'm in Australia, so we don't have access to the Villaggio Pearl Medium. So as I've said in a previous video, Mitchell Grimmart from Rain and Paws had worked a lot on developing a mixture that we could use here in Australia. So I'm using the Australian ingredients as per Mitch's video, and I will pop all that information in my video description so that you can go back and have a look, and you can also check out the videos that's relevant to him. So here I am pouring my first cloud pour in. It is a really nice dark blue. I will add all the colors in the video description because honestly, as I'm sitting here doing this video, I cannot, off the top of my head, remember the colors. So I will list them all because I do have them written down in my studio. I'm just not in my studio at the moment. So I've started with a dark blue, and now I'm going with a very light blue. I really want this, when I was designing these colors, I really wanted this to be a really blue, vibranty, bright cloud. When I'm pouring these paints into my cup, I'm making sure that I'm very careful to pour the paints down the side of the cup. You want a trail of those paints going down the side of the cup, and that's really important for when you're doing your pour out at the end. So there, you can't see it because of the angle of the camera, and I apologize for that, but I do pour down the side, so you can just see there now. So this is my cloud mix. So this is made with a British paints, and as I said, the ingredients will be in the front, but it is a British paint mix that we buy here in our local hardware store. Australia, I call my favourites Bunnings. There are a few others, but Bunnings is the place where I like to go. And you'll just see here that the cloud pour is just sitting on top of the last blue that I poured in. So there's my cloud pour there. So now I'm adding in my next layer of colours in between the cloud mix. So this is another, it's all blue. It is just all blue. Blue's my favourite colour. I love painting with blue. It's probably the most common colour that I paint with. So we're just layering. It is a process. You've got to do it very slowly. Now, I am not the expert in layering and doing cloud pours. Tiffany Berrigan is from Woolly Bee Studios, is the expert. So if you want to learn the technique, you need to go and watch and follow her. I've learnt this by watching her videos. So you usually do a couple of layers, like 3 layers. I usually do 3 layers of paint, a cloud mix, another 3 layers of paint, and then my cloud mix, and then I top it up with some paint. So this is my second cloud mix now that I'm adding in. The amount of cloud mix that you add in will really determine the end product and how many clouds you actually get in your final piece. So I've added my second lot of cloud mix in, and now I'm putting in all of my final colours. So it's all the same colours again, just in different orders. I hope I can remember what orders I put them all in. So I'm mixing, and I've been layering this one with some light blues and some dark blues and some light blues, and then a cloud mix, and then maybe some dark blues and some light blues and some dark blues and a cloud mix. So sorry if you can hear that noise. That's my cat. He's just doing zoomies around the house, which is always fun. It's 10 o'clock at night here in Australia, or in Melbourne. So my cat always goes crazy just before bed, which is good because it means he burns off some energy. I've just added in a green. I forgot about this. So the last few colours that you add into your cloud mix usually end up running off the edge. So it's just really important to remember that. And now we come to the pouring part. Pouring, not boring, pouring. This is a really slow process, and I can't stress that enough. I didn't know when I started this how I was going to, because it's an odd shape it's not a nice round or a square. It is an odd shape that I am pouring onto. But when you're pouring your cloud mix, you need to pour down the side that you tracked all your paints in on that cup. And you've got to get your cup as close to your canvas as possible, and you've got to pour really slow. And I can't stress that enough. So sometimes the cloud pours that I have done have taken me 10 to 17 minutes to pour out the mix. So you've got to have a good, strong, steady arm. So I am probably going to speed this up because you don't want to hear me waffling on for 10 minutes. So we're going to speed this up, and I do move this around because if I just did this in the center, I'm going to lose all my paint and not have the handle covered or not have the base of the board covered. So we do move around a little bit, but I will pop the speed on, pop some music on, and I'll see you at the end of the pour. just have to laugh at how my hand look. It looks like it was shaking or trembling. But as you can see now, I am moving the cup up towards the handle because I really do want the handle to get covered in the cloud pour. But you can kind of see right now, you can't see fluffy clouds, but you can see the tracking of where the cloud mix is in this painting. So you kind of get an idea of where the clouds are going to pop. Now, sometimes in a cloud pour, your clouds take a couple of hours to develop. So what you see when you finish stretching out your paint isn't necessarily always what you're going to see as the finished product. And that's really cool about clouds is one day I might actually set my camera up for a couple of hours and just so you can watch the clouds develop over time. I just need to have time to do that in my studio. But yeah, so this is all the paint out. So you can see I've deliberately put a little track so that I can trend my painting up towards the handle. And yeah, there looks like there is going to, I mean, I already know, but already instantly I was getting excited because I had a really nice looking track of cloud pour. So now what we do is we're going to stretch it out and twist it around and move the paint around the canvas to get the whole design covered. But while doing this, I've also got to be very careful because I don't want to lose the clouds over the side of the canvas. That is definitely not something I want to do. So we're just stretching very carefully, very slowly. It is a process. And you just keep doing it. You tilt it backwards and forwards. I don't recommend tilting in the one direction for a long period of time. You need to go back and forward, because if you spend a lot of time stretching in one direction, you end up stretching out those clouds too much. So you kind of need to move it backwards and forwards. So we're just trying to get the last little bit of paint down to that edge there. So when I'm stretching my paints out, I also want to get it to a point where the paint just goes over the edge. So that then I know it's reached the edge and it's just dripped down over the side. Sometimes you get some really amazing designs as it drips down around the edge. So that's that side done. So now we're going to go back the other way. This board is really hard, really big, and it's really hard to handle. So and because I've just done one side, I've obviously got limited spaces that I can put my hands. So I'm probably just going to flip it round, and I'm sorry if you lose it in the camera, but I think we're going to be okay. So we're going to stretch it now down towards the bottom. So towards the side, depending on how you view the board. So we're just popping it down. You can see it's the green that I put in the very end that I'm probably going to lose the most of, but that's okay because I really wanted it to have that blue. And I think these blues just look amazing. I mean, yes, I've already seen the end product, so I know how it looks, but I'm just already in love. Like you can see now as I'm stretching it out, excuse me, how those clouds are starting to develop and how cool they actually look. So we're just getting to the edge here. Oh, excuse me. And now we're getting to the tricky part of trying to get the cloud and the paint down the handle. And the problem is obviously too, because of the angle, I do risk losing part of that design over the edge of the board too, for the angle part that heads towards the handle. So it's a really difficult design. What I should have done was maybe what I could have just done instead of trying to stretch the cloud pour down to the handle is I could have just done a little bit of a smaller version of a cloud pour down the handle and just mix them together. But that's just food for thought because this, as you can see, is a slow, tedious process. And I think, yeah, I think that's what I ended up doing is getting the cup that had a little bit of leftover paint in it. And I just used that little bit of end paint over the end of the handle so that at least the handle had some cover, because you want it to flow. You want it to look good. You just don't want to end up with this bit of blue puddle paint at the end. So we're just encouraging that last little bit of paint to come out of the handle, out of the cup, to go over the handle. So we're just about getting there. But just look at that board. Like, you just look at that and I get excited. Like, I think we all do as fluid artists. We all get excited when we get to the end of a design, when we get to the end of the stretching or the pouring, and we just look at it and go, oh, this has actually worked. The vision that I had in my head has actually come to fruition on my canvas. So it's really exciting. Really, I get goosebumps sometimes when I'm creating my artworks. So it's, yeah. But you can see now on the handle, we've actually got some resemblance of a cloud pour. So I think we're getting now towards the end. I'm just checking over it, probably tilting it now back so I can stretch the clouds back towards the center. Because of me tilting down, I did lose a lot of them up towards the top end of the board. So we're just going to stretch down a little bit to try and encourage them to come back down. So yeah, I think we're almost done here. I think what we might do, I think there's only a few seconds, maybe a minute or so left on this part of the video. So what happens now is once I've got my design set and I'm happy where it's at, I then pop it into my drying rack that is sealed so that nothing can get in, and I let them sit. I let them dry. I don't touch it. I don't move it. I don't do anything with it. I just let them sit. And I will let them sit for a couple of weeks. So as I said, it's a process. So I'll pop it in. What I also will do, and I can't remember if I do in this video, is I will run my torch over it, my heat gun or my blowtorch, just to pop any bubbles. But they will sit on my drying rack for about 2 weeks. It takes about 4 weeks for a painting to fully cure. And that's really important. You do not want to resin your artwork until your paint is fully cured. And by that, you want the bottom layer to be 100% dry. Because if you seal that resin in, or seal that damp paint in a year's time, you might end up having mold develop in your artwork. And if you're selling this artwork to clients, that's the last thing you want. So in 2 weeks' time, it will be touch dry. It should be touch dry. So then I peel off the tape and get my straight edge happening. And then I put it away for another 2 weeks and I let it cure before I even think about getting any resin in. I think I had a few dodgy spots on this in this paint mix that just for some reason there was a couple of lumps. So I've gone about peeling the lumps out. I'm just checking over it, making sure I'm happy with everything before I go and take it to the drying rack. But that is pretty much our board. And gosh, she looks good. My chopsticks, super happy with this cloud pour. I haven't been doing cloud pours very long, and I'm still trying to perfect the cloud pours, especially with the Australian ingredients. It's a technique that I love. I did actually try, I had some friends traveling in the US recently, and I did try getting some Villaggio perlmuting. They were happy to bring it home to Australia for me, but Blick in San Francisco weren't overly helpful in me purchasing it online for them to pick up. It was an absolute nightmare. So I ended up giving up because I just didn't want my friends to have to be stressing out about getting it and ruining their holiday. So I'm just, you know what? It's okay. We've got a mix that works in Australia. I'm just going to keep playing with that mix, keep perfecting my technique and keep working on it because that's what we do. But there we go. We are done. So we'll be back once this is dried in 2 weeks to take the tape off, and then we'll go through the resin process. So we'll see you soon. So now we're on to the resin part. So before I resin the board, we obviously have to mix up the resin. So I'm going to show you this process. So I've got my cup here that has my 2 lines. So I measure all my cups. Even though they've got markings on them, I actually will pour 200 mils in, measure it, pour another 200 mils in and measure it and mark it off, just because they're not always accurate and you want your resin to be accurate. So I always pour part B in first because part B is thicker than part A. So it's always equal amounts on volume, not weight. And that's really important. So I pour 200 mils of volume B up to my black line on my mark. And then I will pour the same amount of part A. So depending on how much resining I'm doing, sometimes I only do 100 mils if I've only got a small amount of product to resin. But on average, I usually work with 200 and 200 because I don't tend to mix more than that at a time, because obviously your resin's also got a limited working time. So you don't want to mix too much and then have it go bad while you're resining your product. So it's always, if I'm doing a large amount, I'll always mix multiple batches just so I can get it working. So we've got our equal amounts in our cup. So I now have my amazing mixing tool, which saves all the work. When I first started resining, I was mixing by hand. And oh my God, after 3 or 4 minutes of mixing, geez, my arms were sore. So now I use my mixing tool. So what happens here is it will go grey. Like it'll go like a cloudy mix, a grey cloudy mix. And that's okay. That's what you want to see. And then as you're mixing the resin through it will start to clear up towards about the 3 to 4 minute mark. So I'm going to speed this section here up now because you don't really need to see me do this for 3 minutes. And then we'll come back when it's ready to resin. So there we are. We are all mixed up and ready to go. I've just got to clean off my utensils, which I use the Clinell wipes that I used in the previous part of the video to clean off everything. And then we're good to get resining. So we'll see you in a second with the board. So here we have the board all ready to go. So I've already, which I forgot to video, so I apologize in advance, have made the tape line for the resin, and I'll talk about that in a moment. These are my boards that I use for drying my coasters and my boards on there. So what I'm doing now is just popping some silicone squares over the top of each square. So these squares are all about 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters high, and that means my paint and my resin has something to drip on. So my board's not resting on anything. But I use the silicone squares, so that if there's anywhere that the board's touching and the resin hits, the silicone and resin, they don't like each other. So when the board's dried with the resin, I can just peel the silicone off, so it's not sticking on my board. So that's what I do. So I've got the tape line down the side which has got about 5 millimeters between the paint finishing and the tape, so the resin's got somewhere to stick. And I've also taped the underside of my board as well. So if any resin falls over the edge and gets underneath the board, it's protected. So I also will seal it with some Liquitex gloss varnish. I will paint that on the tape as well, so that it forms a seal between the board and the tape, so the resin hasn't got anything to slip in under. So I am a hand resiner. I like to get in there with my gloved hand and massage, what I call massage, the resin into my board. So that's what I'm doing right now with my gloved hand. I've just poured the resin on. I'm now running it all over the sides of my board, so making sure that the resin goes over the sides, because that's really important, because you want your paint to be sealed. So I'm just making sure that that's happened. And the way I know that's happened is you can feel the difference in the side of your board. It just feels smooth
as you're riding your hand over the side of it. So I do that first. I always do my sides first. And then I go through and I just massage everywhere so that I know that the resin has gone everywhere on my board. And I like the idea of doing it this way rather than using a stick, is because then I know I have pushed the resin into every surface. And I find that by doing this, there is less of a chance for bubbles and imperfections to appear as the resin's curing and drying. So I will, once I've done that, I then actually, sometimes I double glove. This time around, I actually haven't double gloved, but sometimes I will double glove. But now, because I haven't, I'm just removing these gloves now and chucking them in the bin. And I'm going to get my heat gun. And I'm going to, I think I must have had a bit of extra resin, so I'm just scraping it off. Oh, that's nice to know. But what I will do next is I'll get my heat gun and I will run the heat gun over the board to pop any of the large bubbles, but also to heat the resin up so it moves nice and freely. And it also then helps the resin to level. So I use a Stone Coat Art Coat resin because it's really good. It's heat proof and it's great. It's a really easy resin to work with. But it's also self-leveling, and that's really important. So by putting the heat gun over it, it enables the resin to heat up and it just levels out nicely. So you end up with a nice, smooth surface. So it's really important to make sure that you are using a resin that self-levels, because you don't want to have a resin that's thick and chunky and doesn't level, and you end up with grooves and bumps and stuff all over it. So I've done my heating with my heat gun. So I'm just double checking it all, making sure that I've got enough covered everywhere and I haven't got too much resin sitting in any spot. Then I will usually get my little sticks and just check over it in the light to make sure that no hair, little particles or things like that have ended up in the resin, because you obviously don't want to get to the point where it's cured and all of a sudden you go, oh my God, there's a dust particle, and it will just do your head in. So I have a filter in my room, a 2 cents air purifier, to help get rid of that. And I will frequently on a resin day go through and spray my room with water before I set up anything to help catch all those dust particles so they drop to the ground. Sometimes I have a wet towel in the room as well, because then that attracts the dust particles. So I'll go through and I check now, and then I get my heat gun, my blowtorch, and I use my blowtorch. You've got to be very quick and careful with this. And I use that to pop my micro bubbles. I love watching my micro bubbles pop. It's really cool to watch. But you don't want to be using it in one section too long. And I mean, we're talking about seconds over each part, because if you do it in one section too long, you'll end up burning your resin. And you don't want that to happen. So now that I'm happy with my board, I do a final check, and then I pop it into my area that's sealed, and it will sit there for about 6 hours. And I come back in 6 hours to take the tape off. So that will be the next part of the next video. I do that because if you leave it too long, your resin starts to cure and you can't get your tape off. So we'll be back in a second to talk that through. All right, so it's about 6 hours later. My board has been drying in its sealed rack. So now we're going to get the tape off. Now, this is really awkward because this board is really big. But you can see here, those silicone squares that have stuck to the resin that's slipped underneath, just peel off. And then what I will do is I'll replace any silicone mats on there that have got resin on. I'll either flip them over or I'll put another silicone mat on that square so that when I've taken the tape off, it's got another silicone surface to sit on. So that, I think, is a game changer using these little silicone squares. It just makes your life so much easier. So now I get my blowtorch and I just, again, very lightly run over the edges where the resin is sitting on the tape. You want the resin to just soften, to heat up and soften, and you'll see when you do it, it just starts to drip, like move down. So we do that because it makes removing the tape a lot easier. Now you've got to be really careful because you don't want the resin hitting the ground. You don't want your board to touch a surface because then your resin's going to end up ruined, which can be fixed, but it's just another process. So this is such an awkward board that I just didn't know how I was going to hold it without dropping it. I just really struggled because of its size. So I've already gotten resin on my hands. So quite often you should have gloves. But I think because of this board, I can't remember if I put gloves on or not. I couldn't remember. I think I might be going to get gloves now because you don't want to get resin on your hands. And it will happen. You will end up with a little bit of sticky residue. So yes, I am getting gloves, which is good to know. So we're just going to pop some gloves on and we're going to very, very carefully hold the board as we peel the back tape off. So always do the back tape first. Do the front tape at the very end because you're going to leave your board sitting on your surface. At least once you've got your back tape off. And again, it's important to take your back tape off in that 6-hour period because you don't want the resin curing. Trust me, I've done this before where I've let the resin cure, and taking the tape off after that is really pain in the bum. It really is. It's difficult because the tape's cured to the resin's cured to the board. So it's usually the board ends up getting marked and you end up sanding and having to restain, which is another step you have to add to it. So by at least heating up the resin like I've done, you can just slowly get your tape off without much difficulty. And by taping the back of the board like I have, it prevents the resin from sliding underneath the board when you're resining, so that you've got a nice clean back of board, which I've got here, which is great. As I said, it's a really awkward board to handle. It's the bad thing about doing big sized boards and resining and painting half of the board because you're very limited on how and where you can hold. So it's just awkward. So I did tape the whole part of this board, and I can't remember if I ended up moving the whole lot of it, but the other half I haven't touched. I haven't painted and I haven't resined on. So I think I leave that tape on until the end just because it was just too hard and I had nothing to hold on to peel that piece of tape off. So, and that's not too much. That's not an issue because if it's hard to hold, like I was really scared here trying to peel all of this tape off that I was going to drop the board. Yeah, this board was a pain in the bum to resin. It really was. So that's the end there of the tape that goes over the front. So I'm just peeling that off from the back so that I can put my board down. So now I need to heat the front part up. And again, I get my blowtorch and I very carefully go over that tape line. You got to do it carefully because you don't want to burn the tape because then you end up with a burn mark on your board. But you don't want to overly heat your resin. Remember, your resin is starting to cure here. It's just about softening that resin so that you can peel your tape off. This is how I get my straight lines, and this is what I love, is getting that nice straight line. So I think I'm actually changing my gloves here and putting some fresh gloves on because I ended up with some resin on my arm because of the size of the board. It did lean on me. Now, I'm not allergic to resin, so I don't tend to react to it, but I do get it off my skin as soon as I've got it on my skin. So I know some people do wear resin suits or protective suits, and great to them. I don't. I very rarely get resin on myself. So it's just that this board is so big and awkward to work with. I think I've said that a lot. So now that we're happy, we now get our blowtorch and we're going to slightly just go over the tape line. Very, very slightly. Very, very slightly. So as you see, it's just a couple of seconds just to soften it. And then we peel the tape. So we go in the same direction up the board, nice and quickly, get the tape off, and then we'll be ended up with a straight line. Now, the other thing that's really important that I do here is your resin will be soft because we've heated it. So it does have the risk of running back down over that board part. So what I do now is that must have been where I hit my skin, so I'm just fixing it. This is the other good thing about Stone Coat is if you get in that 6-hour mark, you can fix up some of those imperfections that might have occurred during that initial starting to cure phase. So if I find a dust particle or a bubble, I can go and pop it and heat it up with the resin, and it will self-level and fix itself. But after 6 hours, you do not want to be doing that because it makes it much harder for that to occur. So 6 hours is my limit for playing with anything on my resin pieces. So what I do now is I actually get, I'm just fixing up a couple of things, but in the end, I have about half a centimeter or a centimeter long piece of board that I will pop underneath the wooden part of my board, so it tilts the resin, so it tilts the board up just half a centimeter or a centimeter, so that the softened resin doesn't fall back over the board. It stays into the painted area if it's going to shift and move. So then that's another way of keeping my straight line. So I must have had a couple of bubbles, so I'm just popping those bubbles with the softened resin so that it's got somewhere, so I can fix it without having to do a second coat of resin. Sometimes, depending on the board and the type of wood, when you do your resin, you do end up with a lot of bubbles. So sometimes you do have to do a second coat of resin, and that's okay. It's a pain in the bum because you're double handling and double doing the work. But if you can kind of prevent that with what I'm doing right now and just popping those bubbles in that 6 hour period, then you sometimes can prevent having to do a second coat of resin, which is great. So we're just doing that, and we get the blowtorch and we just go over that again where we've popped those few little pops, and that you'll see, you can't see it, but if you have to do it yourself, you'll actually see those little bubbles self-level out. And then we're pretty much done, and then we're good to go. I must have dropped a hair. Sometimes when I'm resining too, I will actually pop a head scarf on, or a bandana over my head, just to prevent any of my hair falling out and into it. That's happened a few times. And I always make sure, I haven't today, but I usually have a resin apron that I put on. I've got a dog and a cat, and it's very frequently that I have cat and dog hair on my clothes. But because this was late at night, I've just come out in the clothes that I was wearing, and I didn't even think to change. So these are the woods that I put. So you'll see here now, I'm going to lift up this side and pop the wood underneath. And so it just puts the board on a slight slant so that that resin is going to move down the direction of the paint and not over the direction of the wood. And that just helps keep that line nice and straight, and all that work doesn't get undone. So that is pretty much my board. That's pretty much as exciting as it gets. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, that you found this video very informative. Like with all my videos, please like, subscribe, give me any comments, give me any feedback. I will answer your questions. I will respond. But this is the final product, and she just looks amazing. I absolutely love this. I'm really stoked with how this worked, and I don't think this is going to be my last cloud pour on a board. I think I'm going to do some cloud pours again, but I think I might not do it on a straight line. I do feel that if I had a wavy line, it would just go with the soft look of the cloud pour. But I hope you've enjoyed this. Happy creating. I hope you have a go at trying to create a cloud on board, or however you want to do it. But stay safe and happy painting. And until next time, see you later.